Hey, thanks for allowing me to come chat with you guys. I'll try and make this pretty interactive. I'll start sharing a presentation. It starts actually with a video that I think is pretty thought-provoking, and then I've got a bunch of slides, but we can go wherever the comments, the questions, the dialogue goes. So let me share these slides. Hopefully you guys can all see this. But before I jump into it, it's important to note, what is AI? What is machine learning? Machine learning is actually a subset of technology considered artificial intelligence. And there's also some really deep technical stuff, but I'll try and simplify it. Today, when we talk about artificial intelligence, we're using what is characterized as narrow AI. It's good at augmenting people. There's a research and efforts and stuff around what's called general AI or strong AI, which is where theoretically people believe that when we get to this kind of general artificial intelligence capability, it will be better than human cognitive functions. But when you look at machine learning today and you think about it, in a typical computer language, you'd be, take a math equation, a simple math equation, 1 + 1. We all know it equals 2, but in today's programming, we would provide the computer an algorithm to figure out 1 + 1 = 2. In machine learning, what you're doing is providing the input and the output. So 1 + 1 = 2 is what you'd provide the machine. And then the machine would determine algorithms that would allow them to do that calculation. So that's how you kind of train and kind of human curate machine learning today. With that as a bit of a background, let me jump into this and play this video. Hopefully you guys will all be able to hear it. I'll turn up my volume pretty loud just to make sure.
Welcome to our brave new world in which computers are hearing, speaking.
Oh, that didn't work. Let me turn up my volume because for some reason I did that. Fun of computers, right?
Welcome to our brave new world in which computers are hearing, speaking, thinking, and learning. Artificial intelligence is giving humanity the potential to flourish like never before, yet at the risk to self-destruct. We need to talk about AI. AI will be the fastest and greatest wealth generator of our time. AI will help humanity cure diseases, enable smart cities, tackle our environmental challenges, and redefine poverty. This is the opportunity for us to master our own destiny beyond our wildest dreams. Here is the potential for human society to undergo a miraculous upgrade. We need intelligence. We want more of it. Intelligence is our best ally. Developing smart machines is the business imperative, yet the most urgent ethical challenge for humanity. Already the best chess player is a computer, the best Go competitor is a computer, the best driver is a computer. Self-driving cars will eliminate 90% of road death. AI diagnostic systems will help prevent fatalities due to human error. Judges, bankers, and lawyers are next on target to be upstaged by AI. The list goes on, a truly impressive resume. Intelligence is control, superintelligence is super control. Imagine a world where an increasing number of our human skills are being eclipsed by intelligent, self-improving machines one after another exponentially. To continue to imagine our future in a linear way will lead to fatal assumptions about the scale, the speed, and the impact of change. We may not comprehend how our bots arrive at their decisions, and yet they will increasingly run our lives. Will we happily take their advice and swap democracy for data? Should we abdicate now, surrender to the algorithm, and become obsolete? The more we robotize our world, the less we govern ourselves. Mainframes, desktop, laptops, mobiles, wearables, digital implants, brain-computer interfaces, pills. Where will it stop? Is wired our fired our future? Let's not chisel away our human traits, emotions, spontaneity, intuition, and imagination just to keep up with the machines. When our bodies are no longer central to our identity, we will have crossed the threshold to becoming like machines. In time, AI will dwarf the danger of nuclear weapons, yet it remains a largely unregulated space. Without governance, AI could result in the most perfect surveillance operating system ever built. It is up to us to define the goals and set the boundaries, to determine where the machine should stop and the humans should prevail. This is the clarion call for an international treaty banning autonomous intelligent weapons to avoid an out of control arms race. Our responsibility is to draw the line between efficiency and freedom, security and privacy, super intelligence and happiness. It will be essential to share the abundance and prosperity fueled by AI without creating a society that lacks purpose, aspiration, and self worth. We need a digital ethics council for humanity. We must start a fundamental exploration of what role we want AI to play in serving humanity, answering the why question, not just the how question. Let's uninstall the fear but keep the caution and together design a future that results in human flourishing for everyone. Don't sleep out the future you want. You may wake up in the future you fear. Welcome to our brave new world in which computers
get past that. Hey, so I started with that video mainly because I like it. There's a little bit of hype in it, but I do think it has some really good notions in it. And coming from Intel and spending most of my life there for 24 years, I've always believed that technology had not only security issues, privacy issues, but ethical dilemmas in the use of data and the use of machines and automation to do certain things. And artificial intelligence is no different than other things in the technology stack. But what we've seen over the past 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years is AI and machine learning is almost everywhere. It's built into almost every technology stack in almost every industry. And it's continuing to permeate across that. So don't think of it necessarily as something new. It's still at the beginning stages of it, but it is out there pretty broadly already. Now, when I think about AI, again, it's some data from Forbes last year. Just do this by the numbers. 52% of technology leaders said they are ahead of most of the competitors when it comes to extracting value from AI. Yet 72% of executives also report that it's still in the early stages. So you have this, some people think they're ahead, everybody else says it's still early. But there's still a lot of challenges with respect to AI. And again, machine learning being the primary aspect of that. Lack of data, because you have to have the data there and present to train the models, curate the models, scaling it to enterprise functionality. Again, data compliance ownership issues. Security concerns, inadequate infrastructure capacity. Again, it takes a good amount of compute capacity, which is why you've also seen the equivalent of Intel, Qualcomm, NVIDIA, some of the semiconductor players, basically creating silicon, so processors and memory components specifically designed for artificial intelligence, so that it can perform those type of computational tasks more efficiently and effectively. So you've got all these things that are going on at the same time. Now, all systems can cause unintentional harm. AI is no different, security is no different, AI used in the context of security is no different. I'll kind of walk through again some of the aspects of this as we go through it. But I've always believed that technology in and of itself is useful. It can create social and economic advantage, but technology not managed well can also have a downside, which we've obviously all seen in the past couple decades with the cyber risks and privacy issues that the world has been experiencing. Now, from a paper from Harvard, again, a little over a year ago, attacking artificial intelligence is something that can occur. But it's different in how it could occur. So beyond just traditional cyber attacks, traditional cyber attacks are bugs or human mistakes in code. AI attacks are where there's limitations in the underlying algorithms that perhaps might not be able to be fixed. And the way in which somebody would go exploit that is by finding where there's an auto response to a set of criteria. And if you could trigger that auto response, again, you could shut things off, you can turn things on. So you could actually play with the functionality that's being used there. So you can, again, weaponize an attack against AI. And you can see here with the example, an AI attack can transform a stop sign, green light to red light, right? Again, you can start manipulating those things. And again, I'll give you a couple examples as we go through, but it's different than a traditional cyber attack. So in the AI-based attacks, you have input attacks. So you're manipulating what's fed into the AI system to, again, alter the output. Or you do what's called a poisoning attack. So while the machine learning and artificial intelligence is being created, you poison it with a set of data that will then create a bias or create a learning algorithm in a particular way. A good example of this, it was several years ago, Microsoft had a chat bot that it was using machine learning out on the internet, but the interactions with people were in essence training the chatbot to be more effective and efficient. And what ended up happening is it was altered because people started putting racial wording in there, sexist wording, harassment into it, which then caused the chatbot to actually chat back for certain input. So if you could flood that early chatbot with inappropriate language, it would learn. And then it started spewing that back to people who were actually using it. So it was, again, poisoned because of the way in which it was learning and stuff. Again, it's you can find the news articles on it. Microsoft took it down, and altered it within a few days after it got discovered. But that was one way in which a poisoning attack occurred. Now, for me, again, when I look at automation and AI in the context of that, I look at the decisions. Even though they might be small, they can have rather large effects. And then in different sectors and different geos, we have different values, right? In China, in Indonesia, in Eastern Europe, Western Europe, United States, you have all these different social and geopolitical perspectives and values that also get formed into the use of technology. And again, depending upon the context, what happens if an AI system learned from biased human perspective or decisions? In some context, it might be totally fine. In other context, it may not be. And so we have to think about that, because again, those biases can have implications. And again, I'll give you some examples of that. Back a few years ago, the Council of Europe wrote a rather lengthy study and public policy document on discrimination and artificial intelligence and kind of algorithmic decision making. And I love this quote from it, that the computational constructs don't by themselves have adverse human rights impacts, but their implementation and application to human interaction does. And So when we put technology in place, if that technology creates harm to others, we can't absolve ourselves of that responsibility because we're the managers of the technology. And this is again true in the traditional technology sense, but even more so in the application of artificial intelligence or machine learning. Now, a good example of this, and it's again a study from almost 5 years ago, there was a program, this Compass program, that was used by courts and others to help them make decisions with regard to criminal activity and whether or not somebody would, in essence, violate the laws again, or assault somebody. And because the algorithms that were used in this correctional offender management profiling capability to again kind of help judges, help the court system, help the parole system figure out who would be likely to recommit crimes. When this study unpacked it all and looked at it, there was biases in the algorithms that made it look like Black defendants were twice as likely as white defendants to, in essence, recommit crimes. And so the basis of using this system in parole decisions or repeat offender decisions automatically categorized certain classes of people in the United States differently. Again, the Compass creators disagree with this study from the research I've done on it. But I've read it, I've looked at a few items. I think there was enough credibility that there could have been some bias in the algorithms, probably not intentionally done, but again, depending upon how you train data or train the set of information, it will alter things. It's kind of like, go back to people, nature, nurture, right? If you, I grew up Catholic, so I have a Christian bias based upon my cultural upbringings, right? I've got a friend who's Jewish, who's got more of the Judaism. So again, think about the machines. We're imparting some level of values into them depending upon how we structure the data sets and how we train them. And that's what I mean about sometimes the biases in these systems that we have to, in many cases, try and remove depending upon the context of the decisions that might be made. In other cases, those biases are appropriate, particularly when you're making a decision, towards increasing revenue, right? And you've got a sales program, and you want to bias it towards actions that are going to increase revenue, right? That makes sense that you'd bias it that way. But at the same time, depending upon how you do it, you might end up with some other issues to consider. This brings me to an example that I started using back in my Intel days, long before even Tesla was around and stuff like that, thinking out about the future of technology and the future of risks. And, I certainly hope by the time I'm in my early to mid 80s and maybe my ability to drive is not as good as it should be. I remember when my parents hit their late 70s, early 80s, and again, they weren't as safe because their reaction time steering or hitting the brakes and stuff were not there. And I certainly hope that, in my future, there might be some autonomous vehicle that I can get into and have my car take me to the grocery store, doctor appointment, park, whatever. But my theoretical perspective on this was always, when you get to that autonomous car in that future, imagine I'm a 90-something-year-old gentleman 40 years from now, and I've got my autonomous car, I've got my wearable, I've got my calendar, I've got all this stuff. It has access to a wide variety of things. And I'm going to a doctor's appointment. I'm going to a doctor's appointment because I have cancer and I'm getting cancer treatment that will hopefully extend my life another 6 to 9 months, maybe a year. the system all knows what I'm doing, where I'm going, my life expectancy and all that stuff. And the car is driving down the street at the end of into my cul-de-sac, and a school bus stops, and a kid runs out in front of the school bus. Technically, the car could calculate, if it jammed on the brakes, the likelihood of hitting the child and that child being injured versus swerving the car into the tree and perhaps killing me, but preserving a young child's life. So again, that's an algorithmic decision, and so I've always pondered in this kind of autonomous state for cars or certain things like that. What's the self-preservation mode? Is it preserve me? Is it preserve others? What if there's other people in the car? It's how are we going to program that into the car? Because it's theoretically going to be something in the not too distant future that those type of calculations could be done. And then again, how are we managing that as a society? Are we just going to leave it up to the car manufacturers? Are we going to leave it up to the government? Is it going to be opt-in, opt-out type thing? And again, how do you determine if there's other people in the car, their choices with respect to that? And I'm not trying to, paint this as a negative or positive if people do self-preservation or preserve others, but there is some proportionality of damage that could be calculated and thus minimized. And maybe it's the insurance industry that'll come into the middle of it and say, we want to minimize the liabilities and damage, but that might mean that I'm the one that has the maximum impact in order to minimize the collateral damage elsewhere. So again, think about this broadly, because these are the type of things that, from a construction of the technology, the ethical aspects of it, and even the security aspects of it, right? Because if under certain circumstances that the car will act a particular way to crash itself in order to preserve others, then you could potentially manipulate the technology into doing that. Again, things to consider. Now, let's look at artificial intelligence with respect to cyber. And I know you guys were just having a discussion around the skills and different training and things like that. A few 100% growth in open cybersecurity positions just the past several years. And all the things that we read about say there's a few million unfulfilled jobs globally. And so either way you look at it, we are understaffed from a security perspective. Now, as you're trying to enter the labor market, that's a good thing. As an employer, as a former finance person and economics person, I look at it and I go, that's not a great position to be in, because it says that we have an economic issue that needs to get managed. And either you can do that by adding to the labor pool, or you can do that by making the labor that needs to get done more efficient and effective. Hence where AI and ML and some efficiency efforts in the security space are required, in my opinion, and will be moving faster. At the end of the day, when you start looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning applied into security, it's all about control, effectiveness, and efficiency at the end of the day. And so there's a variety of things that you can do and think about, when you apply controls. And it doesn't have to be AI or ML, it could be any control. Is it scalable? Is it executing manually? Does it prevent the risk? Is it measurable? Is it repeatable? That's how you actually, if you were to look at any type of control, determine, is it a good control or a bad control? Does it do what it's supposed to do to manage and mitigate risk? No different when you're looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning. If it's not providing increased effectiveness or efficiency, then it's frankly a lousy control. Now, When you start doing that type of control design evaluation, you can figure out if a control is strong, insufficient, or flawed. Now, you just look at all the security issues that we see left and right every day in the news, and I'm sure many of you have experienced it, even if you haven't managed it internally for a company, you've gotten a breach notification. We've got a lot of flawed or insufficient controls in most organizations today. And, as you look at your careers in security, you've got to always look again as the effectiveness of control there. And if you've got an insufficient or flawed control, then our job is to redesign it so it's a strong control or remove it. Because if it's a flawed control, then we're wasting time, we're wasting money to have kind of a faux control in place. Again, it's a way to think about the nature of controls, and it's a way to also, like I said, evaluate artificial intelligence, machine learning. Another aspect of controls, and this is from one of my books on managing risk and information security, it's a simplified way to look at risk and controls, but it's a way that I've found that makes it easier for most people to wrap their heads around and be able to have an articulate business dialogue with others in an organization that might not be so technical. There's three primary ways you can control for risk: prevent it, detect it, and respond to it. As you go from prevention to response on that vertical axis, risk grows. Now, there's three primary ways in which you can approach a control: an automated control, semi-automated, meaning people are involved responding to something, or completely manual. There's really no automation whatsoever. As you go from something automated to manual, cost grows because you're throwing bodies at it, and people are expensive. So when you look at this from a 9-box and you start looking at what the controls do, how to approach them, where we're at in the industry, and what the controls are intended to do, prevention's the only true form of minimizing vulnerability and thus the potential for harm. Detection and response are damage minimization controls, because when you're detecting and responding to things, bad things are already starting to occur. So the macro measurements for detection and response are time to detect and time to contain. Because if it's a long time to detect and a long time to contain, that's a lot of risk. Right now, as an industry, I believe and we've been stuck in this semi-automated to manual detection and response space for a while now. And that's the highest risk, highest cost, and most liability to our organizations. But I'm also a jaded person who's grown up in the tech industry and worked for a bunch of security startups and do advisory work for others. If it's the highest cost to me as a business owner, that means it's the most revenue for the security industry. And I'm a jaded person. So if it's the most revenue for the security industry, then perhaps the industry itself doesn't have an economic incentive to solve the problem, because as a for-profit business, my goal is to maximize revenue. So you have to also sometimes consider that the security industry doesn't necessarily have the same strategic economic desire of the organizations you work for, because it's trying to maximize its profits too. And in doing so, might actually do less than it's capable of doing to allow risk to occur, because the security industry only grows while risk is continuing to grow. Now, there's a third dimension to this 9-box that I call control friction. Controls are a drag coefficient. They slow down people, data, and business processes and chew up unnecessary compute cycles. And in a high control friction environment, one of two things occurs. The business or organization adheres to the control, and if they do that and it slows down business velocity, that's a systemic business risk. On the other hand, most businesses, most users, if they have a goal to achieve, a business objective to hit, and a control is getting in their way of achieving that objective, they'll go around the control. So we've got to think about what we're doing from 3 dimensions: the risk dimension, the total cost dimension, and then the friction that we're putting onto the user experience or the business velocity. And so however you approach security, in my mind, we've always got to be shifting left to more automation to lower cost. We've got to constantly move from response to prevention to lower risk. And then we've got to try and create the controls that are frictionless or minimize the friction on the user and on the business velocity, because we don't want the business to slow and we don't want a user to go around the control. So it's a three-dimensional problem that we've got to be solving when we're managing risk and security in a company or an organization. And so now let's apply AI into this 9-box. If it's fully automated, no human. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? In some cases, it may be completely appropriate to have an automated action take place, but we have to always consider how that automated action might be poisoned or might be triggered intentionally, right? And semi-automated, that is, AI is assisting the human. It's a human still involved in a decision. And there's certainly many actions that I would never want fully automatic capabilities in place, and I'd want AI assisting a human. But again, in other cases, those automated actions might be completely appropriate. And the way in which to balance those is based upon the context of what's occurring, right? Would I want an automated action to lock everybody out of every laptop they have? No, probably not. I'd want a human involved in it. I'd want a recommendation from machine learning saying that's an action that is being recommended with the following set of reasons and rationale, so that a person is involved in that decision. The simple reason for it is, if I was in an organization that was large enough and we locked everybody out simultaneously off of their systems, again, that would be like the equivalent of a ransomware attack, right? And so could that be triggered by, again, a poisoning or an input into the system that's wanting to shut off computing for folks? Now, as I said, there's a bunch of AI and security benefits. There's improvements in all aspects of security controls that can be done, which lowers risk. Again, if you can automate certain tasks with a prevention bias, you can lower risk. You can have less whack-a-mole spinning in cycles reacting to things, thus lower labor, lower cost. And if you can determine, as an example, who the right person is and the device is, because AI or ML will be able to figure out that's Malcolm on the other side of it, again, you can lower friction and perhaps remove passwords or do a bunch of things. So I think how we can apply AI into security has tremendous benefits. It's one of the reasons why when I left Intel, I've gone into security startups that have use of artificial intelligence and machine learning, again, to hit all aspects of these 9 boxes. How do I lower risk? How do I lower cost? How do I remove friction from the business velocity and user experience? Again, the whole purpose of this, again, I grew up in a manufacturing company, right? It's if you understand manufacturing, it's all about yield. How do I get more widgets per factory? How do I get more widgets and output per individual? And so it's a yield problem. And what we've got to be thinking about when we look at AI and security is, how do I get yield off of it from my people and, again, my investments? Now, there's a bunch of concerns with AI and security: data collection, privacy of the user. Again, automation bias. Do we trust the system too much? You got false positive, false negative rates. Is discrimination possible? Again, if based upon mouse movements, keystrokes, stuff like that, I can determine human versus machine. And if it's the right human, maybe I can also tease out that maybe Malcolm has got a health issue and starting to get Parkinson's. Maybe I'm starting to get impaired because I had a couple beers or a couple drinks. Maybe I can start assessing sentiment and using that for HR related decisions. And is that a good thing or a bad thing if Malcolm's a little bit grumpy or doesn't like his boss or maybe doesn't like the organization anymore based upon the language? I mean, I've seen stuff where, when you're typing, right, depending upon, you can assess anger based upon the speed and pressure on the keys. Those are all measurable things in the systems, right? And as we use AI in the context of security for that identity and validation and a few other things, we might again be able to understand some other things and whether or not we have understood them appropriately and then use that correctly, or a bunch of different decisions that need to be thought through. Now, I mentioned data collection and the data as a challenge in AI. There was, again, a paper a couple of years ago around where did the data come to train the machine. And there's a lot of leaked data in the world, right? It could be photos, it could be personal information, it could be a wide variety of things. But if you were training and you went into an organization and they were starting to train machine learning, it's always a good question to say, where did the data come from? And is it right or wrong? Is it inappropriate to use, in essence, stolen data? You didn't steal it, but it's out there on the internet to train your models. Again, some ethical choices around that. In some cases, maybe it's appropriate. Other cases, it's not. This is where, again, where you start crossing the boundaries from just traditional security and information risk into these kind of moral dilemmas that need to be thought through, and organizations need to be putting principles in place to guide their decisions, guide their data scientists, and guide the creation of the technology. And again, I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong. It's just, it needs to be thought through because at some point it could have implications, brand damage, other liabilities associated with it, depending upon how an organization creates their AI and ML. Now, this gets back to, again, how do you think about trustworthy AI? The design, development, and use. And this was adapted from the European Commission ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI. There's certainly a legal aspect of it. What are the laws, and in what states or what nations are you going to operate? And so therefore that has to be one aspect of the codification of what you're doing. Is it lawful so that you can comply with applicable laws? The other thing, again, I've talked a lot about it, ethical, right? What are the ethical principles and values? How are you going to use data? A people product, or are you trying to serve people? And again, we see this it play itself out, right? Apple is talking about privacy and people are not products. On the other hand, you've got folks like Google that, okay, people are the product, and we're going to collect as much information and then provide as much for free. You got the Facebook dilemmas, other social media things, right? Again, I'm not saying they're right or wrong, but you can see even in the tech industry, different principle differences that are being used for, differentiation in the marketplace. And then robust, meaning, it's technically sound and validated socially sound as well. Again, because we don't want to have technology that's creating societal issues. But it's important to note that ethics informs the law, but it also goes beyond them. And a lot of people confuse being legal with being ethical, and they're two different things, depending upon the values that you have as an individual, the values of the organization, and what people expect. This is where we have to be concerned with the opaqueness of decisions. There's a lot of the algorithms that are out there that are very opaque, meaning there's no transparency in how the decision is made and what factors are going into those decisions. That's something that worries me. That's something that I always push for. We need to have transparency around what's going on behind the algorithm. That's the only way in order to make sure that we're less likely to have those systems be poisoned because of an attack, as well as we're less likely to have those systems have a bias that could impact people. Now, again, back to security, AI used by vendors in their security solutions. We've seen at least the past 5 or 6 years, almost every security provider out there is we got AI and ML. I saw this start happening when I left Intel and went to Cylance, that was acquired by BlackBerry a couple of years ago, because Cylance was using machine learning to predict whether or not a file or an executable was malicious or not. And once Cylance started transforming the traditional endpoint protection marketplace and traditional AV, all of a sudden every security vendor in the world saying we've got a machine learning. And I can tell you that was more marketing than reality. So let's again look at data. The global AI in the cybersecurity market from some data, a little bit last year. Yeah, you've got a market size in 2019 for cybersecurity AI stuff at about $8.6 billion, and forecast to be over 100 billion in another several years. Now, the cybersecurity spending in 2020 was only $123 billion. So today, and again, this data is about a year old, so it's probably a little bit higher. So if you go back, several months ago, only 10% of the cybersecurity solutions are really AI, despite everybody marketing that. So don't get, the whole purpose of this is don't get caught up by the marketing hype. Really go, if somebody says they're using AI and machine learning in their cybersecurity solutions, ask them how. Have them prove what they're doing so that you can really assess whether or not it's just a marketing message or the core of that capability really has some machine learning in it. Some focus areas for us when we think about AI in our space, again, privacy and data governance. Are people products? Is the data use consistent with the stated purpose? And we have to go beyond typical definitions of personally identifiable information. Machine information is personally identifiable information. My mouse movements, my keystrokes, how many spelling mistakes I have, that is personally identifiable information. I've already mentioned transparency. That has to be there. It has to be understandable, because if something's hidden, that could be a problem, right? At the same time, there's intellectual property in that hidden stuff. So there's a balance that you have to think about when there might be intellectual property in there. But internally within your organization, you need to have a level of transparency. The security team, the privacy team, the data ethicists need to understand how the decisions and algorithms are working. Again, non-discrimination and fairness. We have to evaluate wherever we use automation in these algorithms for potential biases and whether or not it's having an impact on people. And then the other challenge in most organizations, who's accountable for all this? Is the CIO, is the chief privacy officer, chief technology officer, legal, CISO, the business owner? There's a governance model that needs to be put in place that crosses all these boundaries, because we all have slightly different lenses that we're using. And so, I've always taken it upon myself. That's why my roles have been chief security and privacy officer, chief security and trust officer. I look at all aspects of these risk issues broadly. And then responsibility and code of conduct, again, for each of these things, in particular for the data scientist. I've implemented code of conducts for data scientists now for a number of years. They go well beyond the typical employee code of conduct, because I want data scientists to think about those data elements as if they were, in essence, like a chemical element that could be toxic. Because depending upon how you combine them and how you use them, there could be a level of toxicity towards people or towards an organization if it was attacked or poisoned in the wrong way. I mentioned ethics a lot. It's a great book if you're into thinking about ethics and applying it, particularly from a technology perspective, giving voice to values. Mary Gentile, I've spent time with over the years when I was working on my books. But I love this quote from the book: ethical dilemmas in business are often met with silence, not because the right answers were unknown, but because the right conversation wasn't initiated, right? So we've got to speak up and practice having these dialogues in our organizations with ourselves in order to dial in these values. And the other thing is, you can't cherry pick ethics. You have to set the principles, you have to set the governance. Those are also ways, even in the broader security context, I've always had a set of principles in place aligned at a corporate level. Why? Because it's easier to train people on principles than it is policies, right? The policy documents, InfoSec policy documents, 150, 160 pages in a typical organization. Who's going to remember that on the security team or the person responsible for that particular policy? But what we can do is up-level that stuff to a set of principles that become kind of the guiding light of how we're going to make decisions. And with that, I'll stop and turn it over for questions. I know I've gone on for quite a while on this, but hopefully this has ended up being pretty valuable. It looks like there's a bunch of chat functions. So let me kill off my PowerPoint here and stop sharing.
Malcolm, I'm able to facilitate the Q&A so that we can get to as many as possible.
Yeah.
But I wanted actually to start off, you were previously the Vice President and Chief Security and Privacy Officer at Intel. Before that, you were CISO at Intel. You were the Chief Security and Trust Officer at Cyclins and Symantec. And you also taught at the CIO Institute at UCLA. A lot of our externs are about to enter the workforce. How do they go from entering the workforce into the level that you've been at and currently are at?
It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. So I think there's the way in which to think about entering this. You certainly have to have a level of technical depth in security. But the way in which I've grown my career is what I call being Z-shaped. You grow at the Z is a breadth of business acumen. So you understand the business that you're working for, understand how it makes money, how it services and supports its customers. That's ultimately what that organization is responsible for. Then there's the application of technology to support those business objectives. That's where you get your technical acumen. And what creates the Z is your risk, security, controls, and compliance knowledge. So I would tell you to always grow to be Z-shaped, grow your business acumen, grow your technical acumen, and then facilitate the connecting of the dots by understanding the risk and security and controls and compliance activities that then bind the business and the technology together.
Awesome. And then I know you mentor CISOs and upcoming CISOs. How should one reach out to find mentors? And then also, how do mentors decide who they want to mentor?
I'm a people person, so I mean, frankly, I randomly have started mentoring people who just hit me on LinkedIn that I've never met before because they happen to see a talk I did or read my book and stuff. Some folks are, for lack of a better word, stingy with their time, right? But most people I've found that are in the Chief Information Security Officer, Chief Security Officer, Chief Privacy Officer roles, they have a desire to raise all boats. And so if you find an organization, find something that somebody posted that you thought was insightful, drop them a note, ask them for time. Worst that happens is they say, no, I'm busy. Best that happens is they say, sure, I got a half an hour in 2 weeks. And then but to be a mentee, also recognize that time is a gift, right? And so they're giving you the gift of time. So come with some thoughtful perspectives and questions, right? Say, hey, I saw this and I saw your comment on, something, and I really want to understand why you have that perspective. And so I've got the following 3 questions for you. Bump, 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 bump. right? That would be a thoughtful way to learn from somebody. I'm a little bit more open to it. If somebody says, "Hey, I'd just love to pick your brain and figure out how to get from point A to point B in my career," and you do a little bit of, and they start with a little bit of, "I've got this background, I've done these things, and I want to go here. Here's the steps I'm thinking of taking. What do you think of that?" And are there things that I'm missing, right? So come to dialogues like that prepared, because that will demonstrate you're respecting that gift of time that somebody's giving you.
Thanks, Malcolm. Have there ever been situations in which an attack on AI has led to a cybersecurity breach, or do AI attacks just cause incorrect output?
So on the attacker side, the attackers are using, the whole thing's bots. That's a level of automation. Some of those bots are driven by artificial intelligence and machine learning, right? So the attackers are using AI and ML to improve the efficacy of their attacks. So on that sense, yes. There have been things like I mentioned, the Microsoft chatbot. There's been a few other things that were, I wouldn't say a nation state or organized crime, looking to do things. It's people screwing around with, AI that was put out into the world, that wasn't well protected. I'd say that most of the ones that I've seen are kind of in that chatbot space. But I can see where, again, at some point in the future, if I had let's say a financial trading algorithm, right? We've seen, financial markets where the NASDAQ or NYSE stops trading, right? And they stop trading. Why? Because all these algorithms kicked in and you get too much movement of things. There are some things that you could think about that as potentially a machine-driven way to move the market so that somebody could profit. How much of that has been because of an attack versus just algorithms that were put in place, uncertain.
Awesome. What are some top tools or resources you would recommend to beginners for practicing machine learning? Is it using Python and Java or other platforms? How should they go about learning?
Well, I think there's a variety of ways you can go about learning. I mean, Python and stuff like that's a language, right? You can use it for a whole mess of different things. I think, certainly learning different languages is useful so that you can script things and demonstrate that type of stuff. But if you want to, learn more about machine learning and artificial intelligence, there are, courses that you can take. A lot of it is data scientist and math, right? And so if you really start understanding the data elements and really start doing learning on algorithms, that would serve you well. But again, I would also, as I mentioned on kind of the algorithmic biases and stuff, I'd go read like a couple of the things that I put in there in the European Commission and go read the opposite stuff, right? How does bias get into systems? How does bias get into automation? That would also serve you well because you'll understand not only how it gets created, but again, the in many cases, the unintentional biases that sometimes get put into the algorithms, because understanding that will also help you demonstrate, I think, more than the typical creator of an algorithm, because you'll understand the downside slope of some of those processes.
Thanks, Malcolm. Is there anyone or a company out there currently using AI and machine learning to develop automated cybersecurity systems, offensive or defensive?
Yeah, well, again, there's a wide variety of companies that are using the AI itself is not creating the tool, but you're using people to then create the models that can then be applied in a control setting. One of the companies I'm advising right now has basically created machine learning capability using game theory, where it's ingesting data from a wide variety of existing IT as well as security systems. And then it's basically mapping attack paths so that you could figure out what might be exploitable through the machine learning algorithm, because it's taken data from your endpoints, your network, Active Directory, all these other systems. And then the machine learning is basically figuring out, if I was an attacker, what would be the target and what would be the easiest path to get to that target. So the machine learning is basically, again, figuring out the most expeditious exploit path.
Thanks, Malcolm. It is 9:56, and I know you have another meeting at the top of the hour, so I want to give you back 4 minutes of your time.
No, thank you.
Yeah, there are several questions in the chat, but can I send them to you? And if you can
Yeah,
email
send
back?
it to me, or, you know, as I mentioned to you earlier, if you guys have questions or whatever, just hit me up on LinkedIn. I can get fairly busy, but I'm a people person, so I always tend to find time to reply and or find time to chat with people in between calls.
Yay, awesome. I'll let everyone know your LinkedIn. So
Awesome.
thank you, Malcolm. And before you leave, if anyone wants to unmute and say thank you, you may do so.
Thank you, Malcolm. This has been great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
See
you guys.
you. It's very interesting.
See you, Malcolm. Thanks, man.
Bye.
Bye, Malcolm.